What is up guys, Blue Spooky here with a Megamix. If you guys enjoy this long video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Doing all of those ensures I can keep making daily videos for a long time to come, especially these longer ones. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite parts about doing this is reading your guys' comments, even if I don't always get the chance to reply to them. Thanks for watching. I'm a receptionist at a popular hotel chain in the US. For the better part of a year, I'd been working overnights. This night, I was doing my usual shift of 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. It was pouring outside, so I wasn't expecting any walk-ins, and on the schedule, it didn't show any bookings starting tonight. On nights like these, my job is to just stay awake and take phone calls, or help current customers with any room services or checkouts. We had a coffee machine in the hotel lobby, so I had a cup of coffee next to me as I tried to stay awake. Even having been on overnights for a while now, I still had trouble with getting tired on my shifts. The rain outside made me even more tired as well. At around 1 a.m., a phone call came in. I answered, but before I could even speak, a man very quickly asked if we were still accepting walk-ins. Their voice was very muffled though, and there was a background sound that was extremely loud. "Yeah, we have rooms available for walk-in tonight," I said. They responded, but I couldn't make out what exactly they were saying. As I asked if they could repeat themselves, I looked up from the desk and saw a small light glowing outside. It was from a phone, as someone was holding it up to their ear, standing right up against the front window in the pouring rain. Knowing this had to be whoever I was talking to, I was about to go get them, but something about this made me feel uneasy. I decided to pretend like I hadn't seen them. A moment later, they ended the phone call. I saw the light turn off outside, and the outline of the man moving toward the entrance doors. The doors opened, and the man walked through the hotel lobby, dragging water across the floor with him. He came up to the counter and bluntly asked for a room. He was fully soaked through and had water dripping from his hair, yet his face showed nothing but exhaustion. I don't know if I'd ever seen someone looking so sleep-deprived. I said okay and found him a room, then asked him how he'd like to pay for it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a debit card, then handed it to me. I swiped it, but it was declined. I looked up at him only to see he was now staring at me. It didn't go through. Do you have another card to try?" The man didn't respond, holding his stare and not moving, aside from a few rapid blinks. As the seconds kept on without any reaction, I grew more and more uneasy. I looked down and put the card back on the desk, sliding it over to him. He didn't even look at it though. He turned and started walking away and toward the hallway with the rooms. By now, I knew something really wasn't right. I quickly pressed the button that calls for the police, then went out to the hallway the man was in. I found him standing next to the door of one of the rooms. He started pounding on it, yelling in a harsh voice for them to open the door. I tried telling the man to stop, but I didn't want to get too close, not knowing if he was in a dangerous state. He then pulled a knife from his pocket and started trying to pry the door open. I yelled at him to stop and that the police were already on their way. The man stopped for a second, then shot an awful glance at me. He faced me and screamed at me to open the door for him. As he started walking down the hallway, I was terrified. I just ran right out of the hotel and into the parking lot. Through the window, I could see him go back to the same door and continue pounding on it. The police were quick to show up, making it inside before the man could get into the room. Somehow, they convinced him to drop the knife and locked him up in their car. The person that was in the room came out as well. It was a kind young lady who was visibly scared and horrified. It turned out the man was an ex of hers that she hadn't seen or talked to in over 10 years. How he got the information on where she was staying and even what room she was in. Nobody seemed to know. They aren't even sure how long he'd been stalking her for, which is really disturbing. What he would have done had he gotten in, though, is likely far more disturbing even than that. This story is really bizarre as all hell. I still remember it clear as daylight. It was probably May 1st, 2005, in my hometown of bumfuck nowhere, Maine. I was 4 years old, with my father walking around the May Day Festival. It's a small festival put on every year at the local high school, with a bounce house, baked goods, face painting, fire safety teachings, and one lone paramedic in case anything were to transpire. Maybe a couple of food vendors here and there as well. On this specific year, they had this random clown doing balloon animals for all the kids. I asked my father, "Will you go get me one?" He looked over at the clown, smiling, and then down at me. "Why don't you wait here for a moment? Let's grab some water and we can go together," he said, giving me a happy medium. I smiled up at him, but also being 4 and very naive and stubborn, I did not listen. I marched my tiny legs right over to the tall man. Probably 5'11", had overalls with paint splatter all over them, a red styrofoam nose, white base, and a big red smile with blue grease paint. Long, scraggly hair that only came down from the side of his head, leaving a bald donut on top. I thought that's how all clowns looked, honestly. He had white gloves stained in brown and deep mahogany covers. I thought that was paint too, but who fucking knows at this stage. He was making a giraffe for the little boy before me. I was too shy to interrupt, just kind of mesmerized by what he was doing. When he was done, I stepped forward very shyly and stuttered out a weak, "Excuse me, sir." His head whipped over to me. His eyes stared through my soul. I was about to ask him for a sword or something, but he reached down so quick it caught me by surprise. He grabbed my left wrist and yanked it up to him, then sank his teeth into my forearm. I started shrieking within a millisecond. The guy let go of me and ran off down the back exits of the high school. I had a giant bite mark on my arm, and my father ran to my side immediately. He looked up and saw the clown taking off down the road. He was mad, but he picked me up and ran me over to the paramedics tent. The cops were called, and the people surrounding us at the tent tried to view my arm. In a small town like that, everyone has to be involved in something like this. This was pre-high-quality cell phone days, so no one was filming this or anything. Plenty of my hometown residents saw it, though, and all were horrified by what they'd seen. Everyone who saw had to give a statement to the cops, including me and my father. After all these years, my father told me the event coordinators came up to him after my mom had picked me up. They told him they'd never hired a clown for entertainment, nor did the cops ever find the man. They told my dad it was probably some drugged-up junkie having a bad trip and taking it out on me. My hometown does have one of the worst drug epidemics in the state, so it wouldn't exactly surprise me. Irony of the whole story, though? My mom sent me to circus school when I was in middle school, and she also started an animal-free circus as well, made entirely of puppets. I guess you could say I have my own clown DNA. My uncle really hates getting letters. It's not just letters, though. It's anything. Things like get well soon cards, Happy New Year's cards. He just always told my family not to bother sending him anything. I never really understood that, but I also hated writing and sending cards. I mean, it's a pain in the ass, isn't it? I was, however, a little curious as to why he was so vehemently opposed to them. I mean, writing them is one thing, but receiving them really isn't all that hard. It doesn't take much effort to just get a card out of your post box. I decided to ask him what the issue was. I asked him very outright, and in response, the old dude just stared at me a little cockeyed and smiled while lighting a cigarette. He then said, "All right, I'll let you hear a story of mine." A long time ago, he used to work in the Philippines, and between me and him, he was having a really hard time with money. He'd made some bad decisions when he was about my age, and made some bad friends too. A guy he used to hang out with suggested that he check out an opportunity in the Philippines, and he thought, why not? My immediate question to my uncle was, what kind of job? It wasn't anything shady, it was just a delivery job. Well, I mean, it wasn't an official delivery job per se. I remember I had to drop off these pitch-black letter envelopes to certain places I was told to go to. I would go to a location, and at that location, I would be handed a set of car keys by some guy dressed in a black suit, and from there I was asked to drive to deliver whatever they'd handed to me, which usually was one of those black envelopes. You know the type, right? Bubble-lined for sending fragile goods. It was always sealed, so after I delivered the envelope, I would drive the car back to the place I'd parked my vehicle and give the car keys back to the guy. At that point, I'd get paid. Let me tell you, for how simple the work was, I got paid more than I could imagine. It was amazing. One thing stood out to me, though. Whenever I received the envelope I was supposed to deliver, the guy in black that I got it from was always a different guy every time. Each one of those guys told me to never open it. "Well, did you open it?" I asked. He left me hanging for a moment or two, and then he went into an experience he had on his delivery job. I want to save you the back and forth of conversation we had, so I'll do my best to sum up what happened. Basically, whenever my uncle was stuck in traffic, he would glance at that envelope that he kept on the passenger seat beside him. It was really hard for him to just ignore it. I mean, I understand, because as a kid, if I was ever told not to do something, the very first thing I would want to do was the thing I wasn't supposed to do. His curiosity grew every time he made a drop-off, until one afternoon he gave in to that curiosity. He was stuck in traffic and quite bored, and he thought that no one would ever know if he took a quick peek inside. I mean, what's the worst that could happen, right? My uncle opened the envelope and looked inside. Inside, to his surprise, there was another envelope. That's strange, he thought. Why go to the effort of putting an envelope inside a bigger envelope? He opened the smaller one and didn't see a letter or message inside. Just as he was thinking, man, they got me driving around here for no reason, with packages full of air, he suddenly fell incredibly ill. As he was stuck in traffic, he opened his door to get some air. He said there was a terrible smell in the car. He ended up stumbling out of it and landing face down on the road. He began to cough and retch, and said he was foaming at the mouth, even started vomiting blood. He then lost consciousness. Shortly after, he woke up to find himself in bed. Little did he know there was someone from this organization watching him at all times. That person had reported what he'd done. My uncle was treated by a doctor, which, shall we say, wasn't exactly legitimate. He was then driven to the airport and abandoned. He eventually managed to get together enough funds by calling a bunch of our relatives. He was then able to leave and return to Japan. I asked him about what he thought had happened to him. He said he thought he was involved in some kind of chemical warfare between rival gangs. That isn't confirmed, obviously, but it's just what he thinks given the nature of the work he'd been doing. I'm inclined to believe him. He said he never knew what was in the contents of those packages and envelopes he was carrying, and then he kind of looked away from me as if he had been contemplating. Maybe not knowing the contents of those envelopes and packages was for the best. He stubbed his cigarette out and said, "That's why I hate letters and cards," and we never spoke of it again. This happened back in October of 2016, at the very height of the killer clown craze that was going on back then. At the time, I thought nothing of it. It was just a bunch of teenagers looking for a quick laugh by frightening others. I lived alone in a 2-story house. There's about a 3-mile walk between the neighboring houses. It's all separated by tall grass and forest. This detail will be important later on. Halloween night eventually came around, and I was watching Friday the 13th in the living room. The front of the house has a large window overlooking the lawn. I remember it was about 10:55 when Miss Voorhees was getting her head chopped off in the film. That's when I heard a small but very noticeable knock at the window. It made me jump up a bit in surprise. What the hell? I went over to the window and pulled the curtains backward. All I could see outside was darkness. 10 minutes later, I was getting ready for bed when I heard a knock at the front door. Now, the front door had these long panels of blurred glass. I looked through and saw nothing but darkness. However, a red object was in the corner of my vision. Wondering what it could be, I changed my angle of view, and I kid you not, there was a fucking clown standing adjacent to my front door and staring right back at me. I jumped back in surprise as the clown fully pressed his face up against the glass. I saw the clown had a knife in his hand. I grabbed my cell phone to dial 911, and that's when he started pounding on the glass hard enough to eventually break it. I ran up the stairs, locked my bedroom door, and got ready to call the police. An incoming call came in from my closest neighbor. Now, the phone service in my area is pretty bad. The 2 bedrooms and the bathroom in my house are the only places you can get good service. I answered the phone, but I couldn't really make out what my neighbor was saying. His voice was coming in patchy and glitchy. He apparently was in a bad spot for phone service. He said something along the lines that someone had just broken into his house. The call then disconnected. I quickly dialed 911 and told them what was going on. As I was on the phone, I heard the shattering of glass from downstairs. The dispatcher informed me to stay locked in the room until the police arrived. I heard footsteps coming up my stairs, followed shortly by pounding on my bedroom door. That went on for what felt like hours until I heard police sirens outside. The clown then shouted in a creepy and strained voice, "Oh, you fucker, you just had to." A flurry of footsteps descended the stairs and fled from the back door. I came out of the room and met with the officers. I explained everything to them, including how I'd received an odd phone call from my neighbor as well. As I was talking to the officers, my neighbor actually came over, and what he told me shocked me. He said that when he'd called me before, he was actually trying to warn me that a clown had broken into his house and run off in the direction of mine. The good news is that the cops ended up catching this clown during their search of the backyard. They brought him around the front and placed him into one of the cruisers. They said they'd found 2 knives on him and a loaded Glock 17. The scariest thing about this encounter is how the clown managed to get to my house so quickly without a vehicle of his own. He left my neighbors at 11:03 and arrived at my house at 11:05. The next day, I got a bunch of texts from an unknown number saying that now I was going to die. Since the perpetrator had already been locked up at this time, I'm guessing he must have had an acquaintance that did that to my neighbor. It makes me wonder what they truly wanted that night. I guess I'll never know for sure, but one thing that is for sure is that I fucking hate clowns now. This happened when I was working in a convenience store near a cram school. I used to work late at night, and I was known as a bit of a senior there. I had more experience than all the university students who worked there part-time. It was a great place to work if I'm being honest. I have some really good memories of being there. This experience, though, tops the list of memories, and it's not exactly a fond memory either. It's definitely something I'll never forget, though. Our convenience store didn't get all that busy at nighttime, so me and the other staff members often found ourselves free on most of the nights. When we had this free time, we'd kind of just hang out in the back together, eat, and read magazines. It was really great, actually. One night, while we were doing our usual thing of hanging out in the back, I was on shift with a junior, and I was checking the security cameras. I really liked this particular guy. He was nice, and we had a good back and forth. We used to have a lot of fun discussions about movies and stuff. Always just a great partner to have around. The monitor in the back room was split up into 4 sections. 2 parts of the screen showed the cash registers, and the other 2 parts of the screen showed portions of the aisles. When I looked at the screen, I saw there was a woman stood by the magazine rack. Nothing wrong with that, of course. Customers come in and out all the time, and often browse things for a moment. However, this was a bit different. Neither of us had heard the entrance chime when she came in. She had this long, dark hair, and looked very disheveled, for lack of a better term. My coworker noticed her as well, and said, "Hey, I didn't hear the chime, did you?" To be honest, there had been occasions where the chime didn't ring at all in the past, so we carried on talking without giving it much thought. What we usually did was just come out of the back when the customer approached the register. After a while, though, the woman didn't appear to be moving at all. She was just standing there perfectly still like a statue. She didn't even grab a magazine to browse. She was just kind of staring off into space. My coworker asked me if she was planning on shoplifting, perhaps. It hadn't occurred to me, but it could be a possibility. It was pretty odd that she hadn't moved at all. We had an idea. We were going to go out and check on her. We would go in a pincer movement, coming from either side. You know, make it look like we were stalking the shelves or dusting them, to ensure that she wasn't actually trying to steal something. We walked right up to the magazine rack, but when we arrived, she was nowhere to be seen. We headed back to the back room, thinking she must have left without buying anything. Oh well, whatever. When we got back to the staff room, though, I looked at the monitor again and was shocked to see the woman standing in the same spot at the magazine rack. Well, how the hell did she do that? Was the monitor malfunctioning or something? We spoke about it amongst ourselves and decided to go out there and check once again. We headed out in the same pinching movement as before, toward the magazine rack. Once again, she was nowhere to be found. How was she doing this? We rushed back to the staff room. I, for one, was absolutely chilled by what was going on. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I couldn't explain what was happening here. We were quiet. The first thing my colleague did was check the monitor. He told me that once again the woman with the dark hair was gone. I was feeling relieved. I thought he must have been feeling the same. Something weird was definitely going on, though. I wanted to see the monitors for myself, so I leaned over my colleague's shoulder to get a closer look. "Don't move," he said. I listened to him and froze in place. He sounded scared. I stayed next to him thinking, what the hell is going on? I was worried. Was he all right? Did something happen? I looked at the reflection on the monitor, not the live feed, but the reflection on the glass. I could see our faces, but there was something else behind us as well, a figure that I immediately recognized. It was the woman we had seen earlier. I felt my back go completely stiff. We were frozen in place, watching that reflection for a minute straight. All of a sudden, she darted backwards and toward the left. We stayed there for another minute, too scared to move at all. I tried to calm myself down until I couldn't bear it anymore. I looked away and slowly turned around in fear, expecting to see her hiding somewhere behind us, but to my surprise, she was nowhere to be found. We both backed away from the monitors in silence. "Something's going on here," my colleague said, as if he wanted me to agree that he wasn't going mad. He looked at me with these pleading eyes. I looked away and said, "Yeah, I agree." By the time I looked back, he was completely fixated on the monitors again. I felt my heart sink in my chest. What the hell was going to happen next? I looked at the screen, and once again, the woman was back out by the magazine rack. Only this time, she was turned up and facing the camera. She smiled and slowly opened her mouth and began to say something that I couldn't quite make out. I'm not exactly a lip reader here. Without saying anything, my colleague ran out the back door, leaving me alone in the store. As much as I also wanted to run out right behind him, I had a responsibility as the senior staff member. I spent the remainder of the shift stood out front by the register. I figured that if I didn't look at the monitors, then I could visibly observe whatever the woman was doing. But as far as I know, since I didn't check the monitors, that was the last time I saw that woman that night. I was pissed at my colleague for sure, but he apologized very sincerely and I forgave him. It was the strangest and scariest experience I've ever had. I don't think I'll ever be able to explain what exactly happened that night. My name is Austin. I'm a 26-year-old man, and this story took place about a month ago. This occurred on a trip my fiancé and I were on. We had just moved down to Florida for a chance at some better opportunities, especially for myself from where I was living previously. My fiancé had to sacrifice a lot for this transition though, so to help ease the stress a bit, we decided to go on a weekend trip to Universal Orlando Resort and have a fun time together. We had planned out everything ahead of time. With the tickets being so much money, we opted to go for a cheaper hotel to bring the price down a bit. Turned out that was a big mistake. We arrived at the hotel the day before we were supposed to visit the resort. We could immediately see why it was so cheap. The sign said Quality Inn, but from the looks of it, it was previously a run-down hotel some company had bought and slapped their own name on the sign. The room was nothing special at all. In fact, as soon as I sat down on the bed, the frame broke right away. First clue as to just how bad this place really was. We didn't spend too much time in the room though, as we planned to go to a movie that night anyway. We just quickly dropped off our bags and left. By the time we got back, it was around 11 p.m. or so. I was really tired and I had quite a bad migraine. I quickly changed for bed and laid down, hoping I could just fall asleep. My head was really throbbing. My fiancé did the same shortly after, and before long we both drifted off. Before I continue, I'll explain the layout of the room briefly. As soon as you walk in, to the right are two beds with a night table in between them. To the left was a table and a dresser where the TV sat, and if you kept going straight, you would walk to the sink and bathroom area. A typical hotel room layout, really. My fiancée always needs to face the door when she sleeps, as it makes her feel more at ease. She was pressed up right against my chest, so it woke me immediately the moment I felt her suddenly jolt up. She tapped on my shoulder and whispered to me that she could hear someone at the door. She said it sounded like they were trying to get it open. I couldn't hear anything myself, but the sound of her voice made me believe she was not making this up. We sat there listening in for what felt like forever. It was only around 10 more seconds before I did hear something. It was the sound of someone trying to open the door with a key card. Before I even had the chance to speak, the door suddenly opened. Fortunately, my fiancé was smart and had put the door latch on before we went to bed. Through the crack in the door, I could just about see an eye peering in at us. I immediately jumped up from the bed and yelled, "Wrong room, buddy!" The man then mumbled something unintelligible. Whoever it was, they seemed to be under the influence of something, or speaking in a language I couldn't understand. What he did next, though, didn't need words to explain. He tried with his whole body to shove the door open. I yelled at him again, this time with more force in my voice, trying to scare him away. I'm not the most imposing guy, but I am somewhat well built for my height and size. I was unable to, though. After I shouted at the man, he stopped pushing on the door for a brief moment before charging his shoulder into it, trying to break it down. My fiancé screamed and told me to stop the man from coming in. From what I could see through the door's crack, the guy was pretty hefty. Had to be at least 6'1" and over 250 pounds. There was no way I was going to be able to stop him with just strength alone. I grabbed the car keys off the table and held them in my hand with the keys between my fingers. I decided that if this man managed to get into our room, I would swing until I could not anymore. I ran over to the door and flung my whole body against it, throwing the man back just enough for the door to shut again. He immediately charged back and threw his whole weight into it, screaming something I couldn't understand. Next to the door, there was a window where I finally got a good glimpse of the man. It confirmed his predictions of his size compared to mine. To my surprise, I also saw a woman who I could only assume was his wife, along with 2 kids by their side. I couldn't believe this guy was acting this way in front of his own family. I was snapped back to reality by my fiancée screaming that she was going to call the police. Suddenly, the man stopped, and I could see him ushering the woman and kids away into an SUV. Moments later, they shot off into the night. I didn't know exactly where they went, but I told my fiancée to call the front desk anyways, to let them know what just happened. Nobody answered, so I decided to go to the desk myself and speak to whoever was working that shift that night. I walked into the lobby where a line was already forming, so I had to wait. After about 20 minutes, I was second in line when a lady approached the counter and spoke. When she started to speak, the words she said sent a chill down my spine. "Hey, we just used this key card to get into the room, but there were already people in there. It was the wife, the man who'd almost busted down my door." I immediately started to look around. Once I looked behind me and out the doors that open into the lobby, I could see the same man standing there beside his SUV. I didn't make a move, not wanting to draw attention to myself. I turned my head back toward the desk and kept it that way. The lady left with a new key card. It was then that I approached the desk and explained what happened to me. The lady behind the desk told me it was her fault. She had given those people the key to our room by accident. I was so angry that this woman seemed to act as if whatever had just happened to my fiancé and I wasn't anything to be particularly concerned about. I told her to write down a note that I would be back in the morning to speak with the manager about leaving early and getting a refund. I was more pissed off than I cared to admit. My fiancé didn't want to stay there for the night, but it was already too late to find another place. We relented, and once morning hit, we packed our bags and made our way to the front desk. We fully expected the manager to have been filled in on what happened, but once we got there, we found out that was not the case at all. The manager didn't know anything, and even said he'd asked the woman working the night shift if anything in particular had happened that night. She told him no, that nothing had. I was more pissed off now. The manager gave us a refund and checked us out early, while apologizing profusely. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. Thankfully, the rest of the trip was pretty great, and we had a good time at the resort. I'm glad my fiancé had the awareness to put the latch on the door that night, because without it, that man could have simply walked right in. Even with his family standing right there, he acted like a deranged lunatic. I was prepared to attack him if he managed to get inside. Something really horrible could have happened that night over a simple misunderstanding. Always be aware of your surroundings and never compromise when it comes to your personal safety. This happened back in 2012, when I was still attending college. Me and a few friends of mine opted to band together and rent out a one-bedroom apartment near the campus area. We were a bunch of party animals back then, and we wanted our own place so we could indulge in that lifestyle without worrying about our parents or the school's administration. The apartment complex was located in a rather unsavory part of town. The cops were called out there at least once a week to break up fights or respond to reports of break-ins. All we ever did there was shower and sleep, having to overhear domestic disputes and arguing through the walls all the time. It was just part of the deal, though. One night, my roommates went to a party, while I stayed behind to study for an upcoming exam. Aside from Tupac playing somewhere in the upper levels, things seemed pretty quiet. It was around 11 p.m. or so when I heard a strange sound coming from the hallway outside the front door. It sounded like a large metal object being dragged across the concrete floor. There was also a muffled noise, as if someone was saying something, although I couldn't quite make out what the words were. This went on for about 10 minutes before there was a loud smashing sound. It was at that point I got up and made my way over to the peephole. At first, I didn't really see anything. I just waited and observed to see if anyone would pass by my door. About a minute later, a figure wandered into view and stood between my door and the door opposite from it. It was a Caucasian man. I'll list 3 things that instantly made every alarm bell in my head go off. First off, the man was not wearing a shirt and was profusely sweating. There was also a large axe in the man's right hand that he was dragging behind him. Last but not least, whoever this deranged individual was, he had a black leather gas mask on that completely hid his face from view. I was awestruck at what I was seeing. This was the kind of character you'd see in a low-budget horror movie. This kind of shit doesn't happen in real life. It was a real shock to the system. As if reading my mind, a creepy muffled voice then began singing. As soon as the man finished his verse, he lifted his left leg and heaved the axe into my door. His movement was so fast that it caused me to stumble backward. As I scrambled to my feet, I heard another voice from further down the hallway. "Hey, what the fuck are you doing?" I rushed back to the peephole. The masked man was now gone. To the left of my front door was a fire escape, where he was able to make a quick getaway. I then saw the apartment security guard step into view, with his taser already drawn. "Hey, do you want me to call the police?" I shouted through the door. "Yeah, if you don't mind." "Alright, I'm heading out to cut them off." I immediately called the police and explained the situation to them. Unfortunately, the masked man managed to evade both the security guard and the police as well. The complex was surrounded by a small forest, and there were just too many ways for the man to escape. After the lease was up, I moved out of that hellhole. A lunatic pacing up and down the hallway outside my door, wearing a gas mask and dragging an axe behind him, was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was a terrifying experience, but I can look back on it now and sort of laugh a bit. I hope you enjoyed my story, and stay safe out there, guys. I saw a thread a little while ago. I think the title of it was something like, "Has anyone seen a shadow person?" I've never really believed in things like that, but recently I've turned from a skeptic into a believer. I want to share my experience here. You may laugh at me, or you may just feel as if you've seen something similar. The thing I read about said that these shadow beings, if you ever see them, aren't really that harmful. Well, I can't exactly say whether that's true or not. It is just a random thing I found online. I've read some people's experiences where they do seem to be harmful. The shadow thing I saw, though, I'm not exactly sure what was going on. Let me just tell you about what happened, though. It happened while I was waiting in line to board an oncoming train. I was leaving a friend's place. A friend of mine had moved, and I wanted to stop by and wish them well. I was absent-mindedly gazing out towards the tracks when something caught my eye. There was a person. Well, not quite a person, I guess. Something human-shaped that appeared on the tracks. It was raining out, but it wasn't really affecting my vision. I had to blink and rub my eyes to make sure I wasn't seeing things. I couldn't really tell if this figure was a man or a woman. All I could see was a shadow. This is going to sound completely strange, but it almost kind of looked like a television searching for channels but darker. You know, the static sort of thing. One thing I noticed almost instantly, though, about this figure on the tracks was that it appeared to be missing a part of its left leg, just below the knees. I couldn't really make out any facial features of this shadow, obviously. I could tell that the head had a strange shape to it. It looked like part of it had caved in or something. This all probably sounds like the ramblings of a madman. I didn't really have time to fully process or question it, though. There was a train pulling in. I really still thought it was a person on the tracks, despite how strange this appeared. I was shocked that no one else around seemed to be reacting to it. Not one person in the line for the train seemed to see what was unfolding. A tiny announcement rang out along the platform, and we were told the train was approaching and to keep away from the tracks. I thought that if there really was a person there, they were about to be mowed down. I began to panic. I don't think anyone else around me was even paying attention. They were all staring down at their phones and talking with their friends. I heard the train's brakes as it approached the station. It approached the figure, and I clasped my hands to my ears, expecting to hear screams and shouts, but I heard nothing of the sort. Honestly, I thought I was going crazy at that point. The train stopped in front of me, and I decided to take a look back toward the tracks where it had been. I saw that whatever this was, it was still there. I was about to get on the train. I wanted to get away from here as fast as possible. I couldn't believe what I saw next. As I was about to board the train, whatever this thing was peered over at me. Although I couldn't make out any features, I could just feel it looking at me. Next thing I felt was a prodding on my back and a voice snapping me out of my stun. "Miss, can you get out of the way? There are people that want to board the train, you know." Apparently, I was holding up the line, and I hadn't realized until that moment. I didn't really know what else to do other than to apologize and move aside. I backed off the train, causing a bit of a scene. I watched the train leave and saw that shadow thing was now on board with the other commuters. It was looming over a passenger standing by the door, almost appearing to study her. I didn't really know what to think anymore. I worried about that passenger, and I worried about myself too. Was that even real, or was that something that I just imagined in my head and I'm losing it? This happened to me when I was in 4th grade. I'm now 42. The internet as we know it wasn't around back in those days, so unfortunately I don't have any news articles to corroborate this story. I do have a very vivid memory of what happened that day though. The day my friend nearly lost her innocence, and possibly her life as well. Here's the backstory. I have always had this very strange habit that I still do to this day. I don't know what causes it, but I've always walked on my tiptoes when I would go to school. I would usually get picked on a lot for this strange behavior. No matter how much I tried walking flat-footed, I'd always somehow end up back on my toes without even doing it consciously. This led my family to believe I was destined to be a ballet dancer of some sort. As much as I loved the dance, I was also a tomboy, and I preferred climbing trees and doing sports and stuff like that. My mother worked 2 jobs and took me to the community center and signed me up for ballet classes. I thought I would definitely have to learn how to be more girly and like dresses and stuff like that. The dance instructor's name was Mulani. She was impressed by my skills, but wasn't crazy about my height or my parents' economic status. This was a very expensive class after all. At the end of my audition, I was told I was too tall and awkward. What a nice way of building up a young girl's confidence. When I exited the classroom and entered the hallway, I heard Melanie say under her breath that she wouldn't teach poor kids no matter what. I stopped what I was doing and turned around. "What did you say?" That's when she replied, "I don't teach trailer trash, okay?" My face became extremely red. At that moment, I decided I wanted to knock her on her pompous ass, but before I could react, I felt a hand on my shoulder, followed by a man's voice. "You got a real fighter in you. You ever thought about trying out some karate?" Mr. Diaz was a well-known and respected karate instructor in our county. He wanted me to try out his class, and even offered to take me in at no charge. He said I would be his first female student, but he saw some real potential in me. I still owe him a lot for that. When I first started training, he noticed my weird tiptoed footing, and rather than mock me for it, he showed me how to use it to make my legs stronger. To this day, I'm still solid muscle from my calves to my thighs. It was around that time that our small town on the coast of North Carolina was being terrorized by a man who would try to abduct young girls. He would grab them and have his way with them. When he was done, he would bind their hands together, blindfold them, and cross into another town, dropping them off somewhere random in the middle of the night. A real sick bastard. For some reason, he didn't kill any of his victims, but his MO suggested he was becoming more violent with each incident. I remember Mr. Diaz changing his lessons for a week or two because of these incidents and teaching us how to use momentum against our attackers, how to get away, and how to properly attack the eyes, nose, groin, and face. He also emphasized the buddy system and told us to scream fire or say we were having a medical emergency if something was happening to us. On the day in question, I was in 4th grade. It was springtime at the time. I was with my best friend Jenny. Jenny and I decided to take a little walk around the neighborhood we lived in. This neighborhood had 2 main entrances and formed a circle with 2 parallel streets in the middle. Homes were lined along each road no more than 1.5 acres apart, some even closer. It was very easy to come into one entrance, leave out the other, and not be seen by anyone, even if you were paying attention to the vehicles that were passing through. Jenny and I were on the main road heading toward the back. We were just being a couple of young girls talking about boys we liked and the man that had been terrorizing our state. A girl we knew named Kelly had actually been one of his victims. She turned from a real social butterfly into a psych ward regular. She even tried to take her own life at one point. As we were talking about this, I remember looking over my shoulder and seeing a strange car approaching us very slowly. Immediately, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The car was a Pontiac with a faded maroon or burgundy color, and the driver was wearing these thick red-rimmed glasses and had tight blonde curly hair. He had his window down already. He stopped the car beside us and called out to us. "Hey there, girls. I'm trying to pay my electric bill and I can't seem to find the office anywhere. Can you tell me how to get there from here?" Coincidentally, the electric company in our town wasn't even a mile away from our neighborhood. In fact, you could walk straight through the woods and show up right on the front doorstep. The only way to pay to turn on the service was in the office itself. This was a small town way back in the day, remember? The driver said that he had to go there to avoid his electricity shutting off. Knowing he had to have been there before to turn it on, I told him, just go there. That's when I noticed an open map beside him on the passenger seat. He explained his mother had been the one to turn on the electricity and he was new to the area, just came back from deployment or something. "Can you come over here and show me where it is on the map?" He beckoned Jenny over to his car. Jenny was unaware that something was off here. I looked around and saw no one else was around us. I quickly turned my attention back to what was going on. I could immediately tell something bad was going to happen to Jenny if she got any closer. There was a look of evil on the man's face. "Thanks, sweetie. You can point it out to me right here." His eyes locked with mine and he gave me a smile. That's when I grabbed Jenny and pulled her away. Jenny started to scream. I looked up and saw the man had reached over and grabbed a hold of her arm. The car began to roll forward as he tried to pull her in and drive away. I wrapped my arms around Jenny's upper body and pulled as hard as I could. I knew it was going to hurt once I fell onto the asphalt, but that was okay. As long as I still had a hold of Jenny, everything would be all right. I managed to wrench her from his grasp, and we both hit the road. It really hurt. Luckily, some of the neighbors had heard us screaming and all came out of their homes. I pulled Jenny close to me, and the man sped away in his car. One of the bystanders, a mother of one of my other friends, got the tags of the man and a detailed description of what he looked like. That man we encountered that day was the same man who had been preying on young girls all over North Carolina. My mother made every effort to keep me sheltered before that incident, and it got even worse after this. Now that I'm a mother myself, I can sort of understand better now. Jenny was very grateful that I helped her, and I'm glad to say that she's still doing well. The girl I mentioned earlier, Kelly, is an example of what could have happened to her if I hadn't intervened that day. Kelly has a rough life and doesn't really speak to anyone anymore. I don't really know all the details, but that guy ended up being arrested. I often think back to that day at the community center, where I was scoffed at by someone who thought I wasn't worth the investment. Thankfully, Mr. Diaz saw the potential in me. He was the guiding voice in my head that day, and if it wasn't for all the things he taught me, I wouldn't have been able to save Jenny. I live in a pretty small town, and I have a pretty quiet life in all honesty. I have an office job and work some pretty long hours, so I don't really get out all that much, especially not at night. On the night this experience took place, I got a call from a friend of mine. To be honest, I almost didn't even want to pick it up. I was so tired. I'm really glad that I did, though. Turns out my friend had called to say that she really needed a ride. I didn't mind, as I didn't have any other plans. I was just a bit tired, like I said. She needed to be picked up from a big supermarket. I guess she bought a lot of things and didn't want to take all of that on the crowded train home with her. I was all too happy to help. It was a little late to be shopping, though, around 11 p.m. or so. I needed a couple of things as well, so I decided to head out to the store to meet her. The supermarket was almost empty at that time of night. It was usually really busy during the day, though. She waited for me to pay for my own things, and we headed out to the parking lot. I think it was around midnight at that point, maybe. That was when a group of men emerged from a nearby game center. It's a place that's sort of like an arcade if you don't know. I think these guys came out because the place was about to close. They headed to their cars while talking amongst each other, but they looked over at us before getting in. My friend said to me that she wasn't feeling well, and we decided to get going. We pulled out of the parking lot, and a couple of the other cars followed on behind us. That was normal enough, though. It was closing time, and the lights in the retail park were all going out. I noticed my friend was really quiet. I thought it was because she wasn't feeling well. I looked over at her, and she looked very pale, though. She looked at me and said, "I think I know that guy in the car behind us." I didn't immediately think much of it when she said that. I thought it was just some coincidence. I went to look in the mirrors to see if I knew him too, but then my friend suddenly said not to look back. I realized why she was so uncomfortable when I tried to pull over to let the guy pass by. My friend snapped back at me and said not to stop the car whatever I do. I did as she asked, and she decided to tell me what was going on. "That's my ex-boyfriend. If you stop, I'm scared he'll come and try to do something to us, okay?" This was more serious than I thought. I made my mind up not to drive down highways. I wanted to avoid traffic lights, which would mean we would have to stop. For some reason, my car does this thing where when the car stops, the doors automatically unlock while the car is in drive. I decided to take the back roads, and man, that was a bad idea thinking back on it. I probably should have gone to a late-night diner or a convenience store or something, somewhere bright with a lot of people around. I think my friend would have freaked out though if I even tried that. I kept driving down these countryside lanes, the back roads, until my friend calmed down a bit. The car behind us was very blatantly following every turn we made. The further we went from the city, the fewer cars were on the road with us. It got to a point where it was literally just that car behind us, speeding up and forcing me to go faster and faster. I asked my friend why this guy was even chasing us in the first place. She said she thought she had made him angry somehow, and that she didn't want to stay at her place alone tonight. She began to cry, and I didn't really get my answer. The situation we were in was getting more and more dire. I didn't know how this was going to end, and I didn't want to consider the possibilities either. I just kept driving. There wasn't much else I could do. Then something occurred to me. I had quite a small and light car, and the car behind me was much bigger. So what if I went down a very narrow road? Maybe that would stop the guy from chasing us. He would surely damage his car if he tried. I decided to take that risk and turn down a very narrow trail. I kept my eye on my navigation system to make sure I was on the right track. I didn't want to end up stuck down a dead-end road. I obviously also didn't want to send my friend home in the state she was in. I thought about trying to call the police, but I knew the police wouldn't do anything about this guy. They only ever help after the fact in Japan. My friend was sobbing next to me and apologized for getting me into this mess. Maybe I should have sensed something was up from the beginning. She hadn't ever called me for a ride from a supermarket before. She said she'd called me because she didn't have anyone else she could turn to. I told her it was okay. I just wanted to know where I should take her. She replied anywhere but back to her house. If we managed to lose him, he'd just show up right there waiting for her. She asked if I could take her to the train station. I said that I could, but she should probably stay at my house for the night. She vehemently refused. She said she'd already caused me enough trouble. At that point, I realized something. All the stuff she'd bought at the supermarket looked like stuff for if she'd been planning to run away. She even had camping equipment as well. I never knew she was in such a bad situation. I didn't fully understand what was going on, but I did know one thing. The man who was chasing us was very bad and very dangerous. She said she would stay in a hotel that night, get off the train somewhere far away and lay low for a while, hop from hotel to hotel, and make sure her location changed every now and then. I really felt bad for her. She said he was always watching her and knew exactly how to find her no matter what she did. It was all so scary to me. I didn't want to ask her much about her ex because I thought she wouldn't want to talk about it, but I was curious about things. She said it was not just him who would be looking for her. It was his entire group of friends. They would always search for her and bring her right back to him. That was frightening. Something really bad was going down here. I followed the narrow roads back to the city and got her to the train station just like she asked. I was sure the man wasn't following us anymore. He must have given up by now. She got out at the station and we found out that the next available train wouldn't come until 6 a.m. Obviously, I couldn't leave her there for that long. We went to a McDonald's and I thought we could talk things over a little. I was right. She told me more about the situation. Well, that ex of hers didn't take being broken up with very well. He attacked her and made threats against her friends and family, tried to use fear to coerce her into getting back with him. At that point, she turned to me and said, "I want you to forget about me, okay? I'm not going to have anything more to do with you." It's very sad to lose a friend, of course, but I didn't know if getting involved with all these scary stalker guys would be good, and being chased by random men at night didn't make me feel safe. I was feeling conflicted, though. She cried and kept saying it was all her fault. After dropping her off at the train station and helping her onto the platform, she turned to me and gave me 10,000 yen. She said she'd always be grateful for that night, and that was the last time I ever saw her. I had tears in my eyes as I drove home from the station that night. As I was driving away, my tears felt like they instantly dried up when I noticed a certain car in the lane next to mine. I couldn't believe it. The guy who had followed me earlier was still out here searching for us. I tried not to make it obvious that it was me. He didn't appear to have noticed it was my car. After 4 or 5 frightening minutes, he turned off in a different direction. As soon as I got home, I crashed out. It was the first time in a long time I had been awake that late. Despite everything that happened that night, I'm glad I answered her call. I don't know what might have happened to her if I didn't, but I don't think I could live with myself. Like I said, I never did hear from her again. Fast forward 3 months later, and I got a surprise call from my friend's number. I was interested to see how she was doing, so I answered it right away. I found out it wasn't my friend on the other end of the phone at all. The person on the other end asked, "Hi, have you heard from my friend's name?" Calling from her number, it seemed a bit weird. I knew he was likely one of the guys who had been chasing her. I was scared to say anything, but I managed to say that I hadn't heard from her in a long time and that I couldn't help them. They hung up right away. I was so scared, even though it wasn't happening to me. I did have a way to contact her through a separate messaging app, but I deleted it and never dared to use it, just in case one of those men or her ex had a way of tracking those messages. I believe she managed to start a new life, and although that call was scary, it did tell me that they never managed to track her down. I hope if my friend is still out there somewhere, they're safe and living a happy life to this day. This happened when I was very young. Since this is technically still an active investigation, I'll omit certain details from the story. For some context, I grew up in a small town in Wyoming. As a non-outdoorsy kind of guy, growing up in the cowboy state wasn't exactly exciting on any level. As a side note, I didn't really appreciate my home state when I was younger. I was going through my rebellious stage, and eventually I moved to Chicago and went to school there for years. After I finished up my education, I moved out to San Francisco, where I resided until 2016. By then, I'd had my fill of city living and hightailed it back to Wyoming. I now live in Cheyenne. In my hometown, there was virtually no crime in my area. It was the kind of place where you could leave your doors unlocked all night. The only thing that we kids had to contend with was boredom. However, there was one incident that shook the entire community. It was one that I just so happened to witness firsthand as well. The year was 1991. I was in elementary school at the time. Back then, the school that I went to was located in between several small coal mining towns. They didn't have schools of their own. Some of these communities were over an hour away. For whatever reason, though, the school didn't provide bus rides to students who lived in these remote areas. My mom didn't get off work until around 4 or so, and it took her about 45 minutes to come pick me up from school. There was a playground located in the schoolyard where students who were being picked up by their parents would hang out unsupervised. On the day in question, me and another child named Thomas were the only ones on the playground when class let out that day. I noticed there was an old pickup truck sitting in the parking lot, ominously facing right toward the playground. Of course, I didn't think it was very ominous at the time. I didn't really think anything about it at all, really. I didn't know Thomas very well, and we didn't really talk to each other either. I remember I was trying to do some chin-ups on the monkey bars while he was sitting on the bench near the parking lot. I eventually got bored of the monkey bars, though, and walked over to sit on the slide so I could get out of the sun for a while. Shortly after, I heard Thomas talking to someone. No, I don't know you. I'm not going with you." I was facing the opposite direction. The main playground area sat between the slide and the bench Thomas was sitting on. When I looked over, I could make out a figure standing next to Thomas. The only thing I seem to recall about them is that they were wearing a pair of faded jeans. My memory gets a little fuzzy after this, which is disappointing because I prided myself on having a pretty good memory. The only thing I remember after noticing the mysterious person talking to Thomas was seeing the truck speeding out of the parking lot and realizing that Thomas was suddenly gone. I didn't see Thomas getting into the truck. I didn't even realize he'd been grabbed until the day after. My mom arrived about 10 minutes later. The next day, I was called into the principal's office and was asked by a police officer if I'd seen Thomas the day before. I told him about the strange truck in the parking lot and seeing someone talking to him while I was on the slide. Unfortunately, the story does not have a happy ending. Thomas's body was found in a ditch a week later in the neighboring state of North Dakota. It was less than an hour away from the school. The tragedy shook the entire community. A lot of parents blamed the school for not having someone out there watching us, which is a perfectly valid point of view in my opinion. After what happened to Thomas, not only do they have a chaperone out there watching us at all times, but a police car was also stationed in the parking lot. It wasn't until I got older that I realized just how lucky I was to not be taken that day as well. I potentially came very close to meeting the same fate as Thomas. And the scariest part about all of this is that they were never able to find who took him or what their motive was. It happened out of nowhere for seemingly no reason. It's a scary thought to imagine someone just waking up one day and deciding to nab and murder an innocent child right out of the schoolyard. I don't think living in constant fear is healthy at all. However, we must be aware that evil lurks everywhere, even in the most remote and unassuming places. This happened roughly an hour ago. I, 14 and female, was walking my dog Stella around the neighborhood. I'd been at a craft fair all day and was super tired because it had been raining and I hadn't managed to pull in much money. I was asked to walk Stella just after I'd gotten back with my mom, and I said yes. We headed out and I was strolling along, keeping an eye on the sky. It was looking like it was going to start pouring at any time, and I didn't have a raincoat with me, just an oversized hoodie. I heard a car turn down the street I was walking on with Stella, but I didn't give it much mind. I could hear it getting closer and closer to me, until it eventually started to slow down. I assumed that whoever this was must be turning into a driveway, but I looked back just to be cautious. The car, I believe a Chevrolet, although I'm not quite sure, had no front license plate. The car didn't turn into a driveway either. I was a little more than unsettled now. I heard it getting closer and closer to me. I put Stella on the other side of me, away from the road. I was even more frightened when I heard one of the doors of the car open as it was driving. I remember muttering to myself, "Oh fuck, here we go. I better be able to scream well." A hand grabbed my wrist out of nowhere and jerked me toward the car. I wrestled with this guy for a few seconds and began to scream. I hadn't screamed in quite a while. I'm a very quiet teen unless I'm with my friends. The dude jerked his arm again. Stella, being the silly goof she is, finally realized I was in danger. She pounced on the guy and sunk into his leg with her jaws, making him scream like a little girl. She was not letting go. The guy loosened his grip on me by now, and I seized the opportunity to kick him hard enough to make him drop me. He shrieked and let go of me, at which point Stella released his leg. I picked her up and sprinted back to my house. I caught the back license plate, though I don't exactly remember it now. It was from New Brunswick, though. I am in British Columbia. I'm scared to think how far the two men would have gotten with me if Stella had not defended me that time. This happened when I was much younger. I used to have a part-time job working for a liquor store in downtown Osaka. The area I worked in was known as the entertainment district, so I was often busy running back and forth. We delivered alcohol to pubs, bars, and certain nighttime entertainment venues. We would always be particularly busy around the New Year's period. I wouldn't even have a single minute to myself. Now, I'm not proud to admit this on the internet, but I have a very weak stomach, so whenever I'm out in the cold running back and forth, I usually need to go to the bathroom after. With my embarrassment now out of the way, I can go on with the story. About halfway through my shift, I realized I needed to use the bathroom really badly. Normally, I would just run back to the liquor store, but I knew I wouldn't have time to make it. So, under the cold December sky, I ran around the entertainment district in search of an open bathroom. Thankfully, there was a convenience store nearby. I said hello to the guy working the register. I knew him, so I headed into the bathroom area. I was appalled to see that there were two people standing in front of the closed bathroom door. They were waiting in line for their turn as well. One guy was an elderly-looking businessman. The other guy was much younger, blonde hair, probably in his early 20s. Looked like he was out for a night on the town. Since there weren't any better viable toilets in the area, I decided to wait in line for my turn here. Whoever was in there seemed to be in no hurry to leave at all. We were just standing out there trying to hide our feelings of impatience. It was taking far too long. After 15 minutes had passed, we hadn't even heard the flush of the toilet, nor the hand dryer or anything. Not really any sounds at all. It felt like whoever was in there was never going to come out. The blonde-haired guy suddenly banged on the bathroom door and yelled at whoever was stuck inside. "Hey, what the hell, man? Are you sleeping in there? Come on! I've been waiting out here long enough." Moments after that, we heard some noise from behind the door. There was a strange rustling sound, followed by something that sounded like chuckling. I guess some drunk guy had passed out in there and was now waking up. I was relieved because I was on a ticking clock sort of situation. 3 minutes passed, and then 5, and now I was really reaching my limits. I should have just run back to the liquor store. I would have made it back by now. At this point, I noticed something strange. The soft chuckling noise I'd heard before was now getting louder. It grew louder by the second, and I heard something like someone stamping their foot inside. Like there was cartoon knee-slapping laughter going on. It was so weird and unsettling sounding. I don't know if I'll be able to accurately describe what happened next, but I'll try my best. If you told someone to do an impersonation of as many styles of laughter as they'd ever heard, it was sort of like that. Like someone mimicking laughter, but in a completely disingenuous and unnatural way. Like they didn't understand what laughing even was. It was just plain disturbing to hear. I didn't think whoever was behind that door sounded drunk anymore. They sounded like something was really wrong with them, like they were deranged. We were all getting the creeps now. The office worker was staring at the door, and so was the blonde-haired guy. We all just couldn't take our eyes off it. The blonde-haired guy called out to the store employee that someone was on drugs or something inside, so the clerk rushed over and tried to get our versions of events. After we told him what was going on, he went off and returned with some keys. Looked like he had the master key to the bathroom. By this time, everyone else in the store was forming a mini crowd. They must have been drawn in by the commotion and the strange laughing sound. The clerk called out through the bathroom door. "Hello, sir. Are you feeling unwell in there? I'm afraid I'm going to have to open the door now." We all watched as the clerk unlocked the door and pulled it open. I imagined I would see some guy slumped in the corner, bleary-eyed. That was not what I saw, though. There was nothing in there, apart from this really small, weird-looking doll sat on top of a closed toilet lid. It was small and dirty, and it looked worn out. It looked so out of place. It looked really old, too. Clearly not a toy kids these days would play with. There were no windows in the convenience store bathroom, so where the hell had whoever was in there gone off to? It left us all completely speechless. I don't know what the hell happened that night, and I probably never will. Whenever I tell people about this, they never believe me. I've had the following responses. Number 1, that they can't believe anyone would wait so long for the bathroom, and number 2, they couldn't believe everyone was that patient. I understand their criticisms, but there were a lot of witnesses there, and nothing I can figure out can explain why the door was locked from the inside, and all the sounds of moving and stamping and maniacal laughter. At least nothing bad happened to me, so I guess I can be grateful for that at the very least, but it was a very creepy experience for sure. So I used to live in a little town in north central Florida on 3.5 acres of wooded land. There were very high canopies there, so high in fact that the moonlight couldn't shine through. That meant the property was always very dark at night, abnormally dark compared to other places. Before I bought this place, the property's previous owner had shared a morbid piece of history with me. There had once been a trailer out front where an old lady used to live. I guess she owned the land originally. One evening, she was pressure canning when the cooker she was using suffered a catastrophic malfunction, which severely injured that old lady. Apparently, she laid there for quite a while, suffering before she died. You could still see the very foundation where the trailer was once parked. After moving in, I had some bad run-ins with the neighbors. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I've always just felt a negative energy there in general. At the front of the property, opposite where the old trailer used to be, there's a long driveway that led up to a workshop. It was about 2,000 square feet or so, with 2 roll-up metal bay doors on its west side, and a regular door facing the south towards my house. The workshop had very high fluorescent lights and was outlined with shelves and cabinets, with a rectangular wood bracket for a television. There was also shelving high up in the corners where you could mount speakers if you wanted to. I spent a lot of time in there alone. The isolation always did creep me out a bit, but this was my workshop. This is where I got things done. The property's previous owner, the guy who told me about the old lady, used it to work on motorcycles in there, I guess, so it was already set up as a mechanical repair shop. The building was roughly 10 meters or so away from the house. It was around July of 2012, I believe. I was working in the shop and the doors were closed. It had been quite a rainy month and I was trying to keep my tools from rusting, unsuccessfully, mind you. I was in the middle of cleaning up an antique revolver. I had probably been in there for about an hour or so when some lightning struck close by. It startled me, so I waited about 5 minutes to see if this would pass. Little joke about Florida: if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes or drive 5 miles, and everything will change. As I was wrapping up, though, the lightning hit the front of the shop directly, coming through the front and striking the concrete base. Bits of concrete and sand blasted at the side of my neck. I cringed in pain as the lights went out, plunging the shop into complete darkness. I remember running towards the door on the south end which faced my home and kicking it open, revolver in hand, as if I was going to go shoot the storm or something. The true ruthlessness of this storm was now vividly displayed in front of me. Rain was rushing past me into the darkness of the now powerless shop. I stood there for a few minutes, wondering if I should run the 100 or so meters to the house. Another strike landed nearby, and I decided to get out of there. As I was running through the rainfall, I immediately began to slosh in knee-high water rapids that I hadn't noticed before. Water was rushing all around the front of the property. My pace was really slowed by these flooding waters, now constantly beating against my legs. I got within 30 feet of the sliding glass doors of my home. Safety was within my grasp. I stepped out of the rushing water and onto the small concrete slab, which was a few inches elevated. It had once been the foundation for the aforementioned trailer. Before I could even bring myself to slow down, I slid into the accumulated 4 inches of water that was gathered in my yard. I was now completely soaked, covered in muddy water. Without hesitation, I brought my legs off the ground and onto the landing and opened the sliding glass doors. Not a moment later, lightning struck again, hitting a pine tree not 6 feet away from where I'd been. I was blinded by the flash of light. I rose to my feet and slapped my muddy revolver on the countertop, then ran toward the staircase. Under the staircase was a large desk where the family computer used to be, so I decided to take refuge under there until this storm passed by. Within seconds, lightning hit my house. Another blinding flash enveloped me. My arms and legs seized up. The lightning had blasted through the roof and struck the floor tiles, causing them to explode. I quickly began to remove everything metallic I had on me. My wallet, my steel-toed boots, my watch, my belt, even my wedding ring. I tossed it all into the living room. Every muscle in my body was on fire. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't breathe. I imagine it's because of all the adrenaline rushing through me. I laid there and started to shiver. It took what felt like forever for the lightning to fade and for the storm to eventually subside. Later on, while surveying the damage with my wife, we discovered several charred bits blown straight out of the walls and blasts of tile upstairs. I've had quite a few years to reflect on the situation that night. I still get uncontrollable anxiety and feel like I'm not safe anywhere, like I could be struck by lightning at any time. Sometimes I wonder if the heavens were angry with me that day. I'm a 17-year-old male from England. When this took place, I was 16. It was December of last year. Me and my mates live in a small village located about 20 miles south of Manchester. 2 minutes on the train from us was a larger village, which we would frequently visit as we attended school there. There was also just a lot more stuff to do. Our small village didn't exactly offer much for a bunch of amped-up 16-year-olds. There was this old abandoned office building in the larger village that was about a 5 to 10 minute walk from the village center, where all the shops and stuff were. The old office building was very creepy. It was especially a frightening sight to look at night. Each floor was the same, a huge office space to the right of a staircase leading to the black stairwell. To the left were the toilets and various other side rooms. We would sneak in through broken windows and then cover them up so no other people would know we were there. Once in the building, the first thing we did was go up onto the roof and get a bird's eye view of the village below. One night, me and 3 of my buddies decided to play a game of hide and seek in the old building. The rules were that the seekers had to count on the roof and give the hiders at least 5 minutes before coming down to look for them. After several rounds and even changing up the teams a couple of times, one friend and I decided it would be a good plan to hide near the ladder. That way, when the seekers came down to find us, we could discreetly climb up and hide out on the roof instead. After successfully making our way up without being seen, we stayed there for about half an hour. The 2 seekers eventually got bored of looking for us and came up to the roof, where we then jumped out and scared them for a laugh. "How long have you guys been up here?" one of them asked. I kept saying we had been up there the whole time, and he looked at me really confused but didn't really say anything else. I thought that was a bit of a weird reaction, but didn't really mind it. We decided to play one more game before heading out. It was now our turn, so we started the timer, and the former seekers descended the ladder. Once 5 minutes had passed by, we began our search for them. Once we got to the top of the stairs, I looked in through one of the big main offices where you could see the black stairwell. I saw one of the hiders walking down them. I thought I would be sneaky and go down the main stairs and cut them off, but when I got there, they were already gone. 15 minutes later, me and my partner were getting bored and a bit creeped out. We knew they had to be somewhere in the building because we kept hearing these footsteps and doors closing and what sounded like things being dropped on the floor. We decided to cheat and FaceTime one of the hiders. When my friend picked up, though, we were mortified to see the Christmas lights outside of the building. They had ditched us, and whatever we were hearing was not our friends at all. We immediately hung up and looked at each other before hauling ass out of there. After meeting up with the other two, they went on to say that to get back at us for outsmarting them, they thought it would be funny to leave the building altogether, knowing someone else was definitely in there with us. After calming down because I was really pissed off at them, we all then talked about what we saw. My friend explained that when they were trying to find us, they'd both seen someone in the back stairwell. They'd also heard people talking and heard doors opening and closing, what sounded like random things falling to the floor too. When they both realized we were actually on the roof, that's when they decided to leave and play their little prank on us. I responded by telling them that I'd also seen a figure on the back stairs and how we'd heard the exact same things they did. To this day, I still have no idea who or what was in there with us. We had been in that building several times before and never encountered such a problem. We never even saw another person. For hours on end, we were playing hide and seek in there, completely unaware that some person or even multiple people were in there with us. It makes me sick. The building was demolished a month after this happened, and they plan on replacing it with a housing development. So this has to be the strangest thing I've ever experienced. At the time, it was very unsettling. I'm from the Bristol area, in the southwest region of the United Kingdom. Back in July of 2001, I was working my first job at a local department store while studying for my final GCSE exams. I was 16 at the time, and I used my pitiful first month's wages to buy my first mobile phone, a Nokia 3210. At first, everything was perfectly normal, and I was enjoying the novelty of communicating while on the move. I was sending short messages and all that sort of thing, until I started getting these random missed calls. They were always from a future timestamp as well. I would always get these bizarre calls either during my shift or just before it started. When I would check the details, it would display the same date and time on every occasion. One missed call, no number, December 31st, 2049. New Year's Eve, nearly 50 years into the future. These cars always came from a quote, no number. It didn't say unknown number, mind you. It said no number. I had no idea what that could possibly mean. That was certainly unusual, especially for cell phones in the early 2000s. Most people I tell this story to try to rationalize this by saying, oh, the phone date was just set incorrectly, but I proved them wrong by showing them that the phone was displaying the correct date. I would have chalked this all up to a one-off glitch had it happened only once, but I lost count after it happened 20 times over the space of 1 month. I remember on the 11th time it happened, I managed to catch the call as it was ringing. When I picked up, I heard this strange, garbled noise. It was almost like the chirping and whirling of an old dialed-up modem, mixed with the sound of someone choking or something. Unfortunately, it was too distorted to make out any words if there were any. I've tried searching forums, chat rooms, and various other websites for a few years afterward, looking for any kind of information about this phenomenon. I found nothing. The calls stopped around December of 2001, but the creepiest thing was that every time I missed one of these calls, this sensation would come over me, like someone was suddenly watching me. No one was ever in close proximity to me, though. When I found out I had missed a call, I remember even trying to take photos of the screen with another camera as evidence. Somehow, though, all the pictures came out unfocused and blurry. Remember, 20 years ago, we didn't have cameras built into phones, and screenshots weren't a thing either. What do you think this was? A random error? Or my future self trying to warn me about something? Maybe just a glitch in the Matrix. All I know is that it felt very wrong at the time, like I had discovered something I shouldn't have. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.